yes, they have put in place what you would generally call policies. So, for instance, they did issue a circular, I think in 2016, changing the caliber of health workers who can, for example, examine victims of sexual violence. So you no longer have to wait for a medical doctor, since there are very few, to be examined in order to get a medical form that you can use as evidence of sexual violence. Any other health official, can be a clinical officer, can actually examine you, and that evidence will be accepted. So that's one of the things that comes to mind off the cuff about some of the, I would say, directives they put in place in terms of access to justice. And then, of course, you have so many policies, gender progressive policies. Uganda has so many gender progressive policies. We even have a gender strategy for implementing the land policy, and in there they talk about issues of how women can be able to access land justice. We have the violence against children in schools policy that talks about different avenues for different steps that ought to be taken, or protocols that ought to be followed in order to, enable children report cases of violence, including girls in schools. Oh, the list is endless. Uganda has so many policies, but the problem is they don't get implemented. So yes, the policies are there, but they need to be implemented. Implementation is a problem. And maybe just to add, even the policies themselves, yes, they are there. There are many, but there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of what was being discussed during the show, in terms of making them respond to all the different intersectional issues. So you'll find that yes, there is a land policy, our gender policy on implementation, or gender strategy on implementing the land policy, but it doesn't, for example, address issues of women with disabilities. It may not necessarily address issues of women in cohabitation relationships, where they are not in legally recognized marriages. So there are so many issues, cross-cutting and intersectional issues in all those different policies that are not addressed. So I would say the government of Uganda has put so many policies in place, laws, policies in place to enable women access justice. But there is still a lot that needs to be done in terms of improving them, their texts, in terms of how they respond to intersectional issues. And then even more importantly, there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of putting those policies in place, putting actual structures that work in place to have those policies implemented. The root cause of gender injustice, in my view, is patriarchy. Let me explain. So, because, so put plainly, patriarchy is the notion of male dominance in everything. Yeah. I think, like Maria is explaining, like right from the onset, from childhood, we are taught that father is the head of the home, the head of the family, and because that notion of male dominance is fed into our minds right from childhood, we grow with it, and it goes on to describe certain attributes that should that a person should have in order to enforce that notion of male dominance. A man should be macho. A man should be does not drive slowly at 40 kilometers per hour. Drive the car like a man. Drive 100 kilometers per hour even when you're on Tinder stretcher. So there is all that. What then becomes now the toxic masculinity. and then it translates into violence at the end of the day, and the violence is meted out against the female gender or the women, because the men are then trying to enforce or make sure that they maintain the status quo of male dominance, the patriarchy. And when I talk about violence, I'm not speaking about just physical violence. It's emotional violence, it's economic violence, it's all forms of violence, which at the end of the day, puts women at a disadvantage. And even some men who will not subscribe to the ideals of patriarchy and toxic masculinity that are supposed to enforce the status quo of male dominance in society, will also suffer violence, because they are seen as the ones that are bringing down the male species by not conforming to what is supposed to be the norm of the macho man. So you find that they also will suffer injustice, and it will be because of their gender. So gender injustice, which is caused by patriarchy, will have a negative impact, or will be suffered by women mostly, for the most part, but even men will also suffer injustice because of patriarchy. Yes. Well, I'll begin by putting a disclaimer that the understanding of feminism is really, really diverse. So I'll start by saying that there are those who misunderstand it, then there are those who understand it in different ways, even within the realm of feminists. But I will refer to a very famous African feminist, despite the fact that she herself has been under fire on various issues, especially in terms of appreciating intersectionality of women. Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, she said, a feminist, simply put, is a person who believes in the equality of sexes. And I would say that I personally subscribe to that definition of who a feminist is. So if I come up and say that I'm advocating for gender equality and that I believe in gender equality, then you're a feminist. It's just that, of course, there are all these stereotypes that that people have, especially people who do not, who are not willing to even engage with what feminism is all about in the first place. They have all sorts of misconceptions about who feminists are. They always say very weird things about how we are those women who like making so much noise, we hate men, we don't like to shave. And they're like, where did you get these ideas, about feminism, that you're always angry, that we are bitter? So there are all those misconceptions about what a feminist is. But simply put, and I think in the simplest definition of that word, I would say that yes, if you advocate for gender equality, you believe in the equality of sexes, and you believe in gender justice, then you're a feminist, because I personally believe that feminism is all about gender justice. So if I believe that a man or a woman has just about the same responsibility as a man to provide for the family, and that a man is not any less of a man because he's not able to provide financially, but he can, provide moral and other care work in the home, I'm not going to, if I don't despise him and I don't think that he should be despised or should be considered any less of a man because of that, then I'm actually a feminist, because I believe in the equality of the genders. I believe in gender justice. I think for me, a way forward would be teach them young. Teach them young. So if there are young feminists out there, whether boys or girls, I think they need to be taught from the onset the diversity, especially as they start to understand the different ways of the world, they need to be taught from an early stage that different diversities, you know. So they need to, for example, unlearn some of the things they could have been taught in schools, especially about the different gender roles, you know, of women. And then as they even grow older, you know, they need to understand even the harsh realities of life. For example, if you want to say that you want to enable people understand the dynamics of women who are engaged in sex work, they need to understand from the onset that sometimes people make choices because they did not have the privileges that some of us had when we were growing up. There were different circumstances that they grew up in, and they were surrounded by bad choices. So they just had to choose from among those bad choices in order to be able to survive. So understanding the fact that we come from different backgrounds, the fact that we are not the same, you know. Sometimes we grow up in a bubble. So because you grew up, you went to school, your parents catered to your every need, they, you know, helped you paid your tuition until you go to university. Or maybe they didn't, but you were lucky and maybe you got somebody who helped you out with school and you're able to take it on from there. Some people did not have those opportunities in life. So they end up how they end up, and discriminating against them is not going to keep you safe, because any injustice that they suffer at the end of the day is an injustice that you end up suffering. And especially for those of us who use a public health angle in advocating for rights of sexual and gender minorities like sex workers, the biggest example that we use is the HIV pandemic. If you are harassing this sex worker, you're arresting her and then you're subjecting her to sexual violence in order for her to get freedom, you know, because police officers do that. They ask for sex in exchange for freedom. And then tomorrow the police officer goes back to his wife, and then the wife goes back to her lover, and then the sexual network goes on and on and on. At the end of the day, the HIV scourge is not going to end if we are discriminating against a particular section of people. So that's just one way I can look at it. We need to teach. We need to teach people from the onset. Of course, giving relevant information at different stages, appropriate information at appropriate stages in life, because there are feminists in schools right now. I was happy to learn recently that there are feminist clubs in some high schools. So at that stage, they need to learn the different, unlearn some of the things they've been learning since primary school about what roles does mother and father play. I was very happy when I listened to a young girl in S2 from Namagunga, you know, from a feminist club, saying that child care is not supposed to only be done by mothers, because even mothers these days are busy. So fathers cannot give the excuse that they are busy not to, you know, give attention to the children. So that was a very good example of a young feminist unlearning some of the ideals that are instilled in them at a younger age about gender roles. So teach them young, for me, is the message.